Okay, we're going to look at grain drying and the physics of grain drying. What does a grain dryer do? I feel like sometimes they get explained as a very complicated unit for what they actually do. There's only three things a grain dryer does. It increases the airflow across the grain. So we have airflow. We have burner, makes heat to save time. So it adjusts the speed of drying by adding heat and airflow. It is that simple. So we're going to go through some of the numbers of the speed of drying, how some different models of dryers work, and what to do if your dryer's not performing the way it's supposed to be. Then at the end, we're going to go through some troubleshooting for if your dryer doesn't perform the way it's supposed to. So we're going to start with cross-flow dryers. The cross-flow dryers are usually like a screen type dryer where the grain is flowing one direction and the air is flowing across the flow of the grain. So if the grain is flowing straight down the column and the air is blowing across the flow of the grain. Screen type dryers, most of them are around 80 CFMs per bushel of airflow. We're going to talk a lot about CFMs today. A CFM is a cubic foot per minute. So a cubic foot of airflow per minute per bushel. So 80 cubic feet of airflow go across each bushel of grain per minute. It's fairly high airflow. It's some of the highest airflow in grain drying. With that airflow in most of your screen dryers, you're going to have about 7 minutes per point of moisture at 180 degree plenum temp. So if you want to remove 1 point in moisture from a bushel of grain, it's going to take about 7 minutes to remove 1 point of moisture if you're blowing 180 degree plenum temp air across it. There's minority variables to that. That's a fairly stable number. 10-point removal corn is going to need to stay in that 80 CFMs of airflow at 180 degrees for 70 minutes. So if it's a continuous flow dryer, it's going to have to the grain's going to have to be moving at the speed so that it takes 70 minutes for the grain to get from the top of the dryer down to the bottom of the dryer. So if you slow down the speed, it's going to make the corn drier. If you speed it up, it's going to make it that the corn comes out wetter. The one thing we really need to be careful what this shows us is if you make an adjustment to your dryer and you're removing, let's say you're drying at the speed of 10-point moisture removal, and it's taking 70 minutes for the kernel of corn to go through the drying section. If you make an adjustment, it's going to take 70 minutes for the adjustment to make full, complete effect. So don't be making adjustments to your dryer real often. Like coming to your dryer, make an adjustment, half hour later, make an adjustment again. It's just something to keep in mind that it takes 70 minutes if you're removing 10 points on 180 degree plenum with 80 CFM per bushel in a screen type continuous flow. So if we look at mixed flow grain dryers, 40 CFM per bushel. So this is where the mixed flow grain dryer gets its efficiency. Some of its efficiency is the lower airflow per bushel. The 40 CFM per bushel is half the speed of airflow across the grain. We have 12 minutes to remove 1 point of moisture at 180 degree plenum temp in a mixed flow dryer. So each kernel of corn has to stay in that dryer for 12 minutes per point of moisture removed. So if we're removing 10-point removal, The corn needs to stay in the dryer 120 minutes. The cross-flow dryer was 70 minutes for the same moisture, same plenum. The mixed flow is 120. So that is where the mixed flow dryer gets its grain quality, is the speed of drying. It does not dry any more even than a screen type dryer. It dries each kernel slower on average. Same in a mixed flow dryer. The faster you move that grain through, the less moisture it's going to take out. The slower you move it through, the more moisture it's going to take out. It's all CFMs of airflow, temperature on the plenum, and the points you need to remove for how much time it's going to take. These are simple calculations and very easy to figure out that it's physics. It's how things work. So you can easily calculate if your dryer's working correctly. Stirring bins. When we look at a stirring bin, you're going to have about 1 CFM per bushel. So our airflow goes from 80 on the crossflow, 40 on the mixed flow, to about 1 CFM per bushel. So it's going to take 13 hours to remove 1 point of moisture at 120 degree plenum temp. Now, here you're going to see on the stirring bin, I'm not going to recommend 180 degree plenum temp because the risk of fire is too high. So I'm going to recommend about 120 degree plenum temp. There are times I'll recommend 140 depending on your situation. But at 120, it takes 13 hours per point of moisture removed. 10 point removal takes 130 hours of drying time. So it's the same concept as a continuous flow dryer. It's airflow, temperature, time. It's all just arithmetic. Now we move on to the roof dryer, aka top dryer. I need to be careful how I word things because I express my opinion, and there are salespeople who get frustrated with me and try to get me in trouble with people I work with. So 35 to 50 CFM per bushel, depending on how the salesman felt on what he thought he could accomplish with what fans. Usually not engineering, usually hip shots. So with that variance in airflow, there's a variance of 7.5 to 12 minutes per point of moisture removed at 180 degree plenum temp. So the quality and efficiency variation in top dryers is huge depending on how the salesman felt that day when quoting. If you got a continuous flow top dry with big fans that really dries fast, the higher this number is going to be. The bigger the fans, the higher this number. And the higher that number, the lower the time. I do my math on 180 degree plenum on them because that's where they should be run. I would not run them higher than 180 degree plenum. If you go back here to my crossflow dryer, I have the math at 180 degrees, but I would run these about 195. On the mixed flow, I have the math at 180, but I would run these anywhere from, I would run this like 200, 210. I'm going to run this the hottest of any dryer because this is putting out the highest quality grain of any of the dryers we're looking at, except the stirring bin. The stirring bin is going to do the best. Why? Because it's spending 13 hours to remove a point of moisture. So that's going to produce quality grain. It's nothing is going to produce higher quality grain than the stirring bin. But anybody who has owned a stirring bin and went to continuous flow can explain why the stirring bin is not king. So with the top dryer, we're all over the place. You need to know what your dryer does, how it works. There's lots of variables here. So there's calculators to figure this stuff all out, and it's not real complicated to figure out your minutes per point of moisture removed, but it's hard to throw a number, an average number at it because they're all over. The grain quality in these is anywhere from slightly better to a cross flow to the quality of a mixed flow, depending on how the dryer is configured. So what if your grain dryer is not doing the capacity it's supposed to? So what are we going to do then? What if your dryer does not do the capacity it's supposed to? And you have your dryer is let's say it's performing, let's say you have a cross flow dryer and it's performing terribly. So we're going to go back to these three things right here: airflow, temperature, and time. So the number one thing that I look at when a dryer is not performing correctly is temperature. Is your plenum the temperature that the controller says it is? Go to the back of your dryer, install a meat thermometer in the plenum. Drill a hole, remove a bolt, whatever. Stick it in the corner of the door. Put a meat thermometer in the plenum and find out what the actual temperature of the dryer plenum is. Is it what the controls say? Is your sensor going bad and it running 40 degrees cooler than what the controls say it's running? That's the number one thing. The number two thing is the fan. Is it a belt drive fan? If it's a belt drive, are the belts slipping? Verify the belts are not slipping. If it's a axial fan, or if you have already verified the belts are not slipping, then look at amp draw on the motor. Is the amp draw where it should be? If the amp draw is where it should be and the belts are not slipping, or it's a direct drive fan, then you're going to have the correct airflow. And then at that point, we're going to look at time. Is it actually slow? You know how many bushels your wet bin holds? Time how long it takes to empty the wet bin. Or let it run for 12 hours and then have the wet bin full. Let it run for 12 hours and fill the wet bin. How many bushels does it take to fill it? It's going to give you a real good idea to verify that your dryer's not performing like it should, or how exactly it's performing. So we verify our airflow, we verify our burner, our temperature of the plenum. On the airflow, I want to hit on one thing. I have seen belt drive fans, when you get into 50 horse and up fans, where the belts get hard and slip without squealing or without smoking, where the belts get real hard and they'll slip and you won't have the airflow you need. So if your belts are more than 5 years old on your fan and you're having drying issues, you put new belts on. Just put new belts on. That way you know that's not the issue. And if we know our fan is working correctly, we know our heat is working correctly, then we look at time. We calculate our bushels per hour by running out of the wet bin or running into a truck and figuring out our bushels per hour. Most of your new dryers have bushel per hour counters, but if you're in a situation where your things aren't holding out, you want to physically test it and make sure that you know what you're looking at. And if you look at all of this and your dryer is doing significantly less than it normally does or what it should do, then we're going to look here. Uneven drying in the dryer. Uneven drying causes dryers to perform terrible in capacity and quality. So if your dryer is drying uneven, you can have, you want to climb inside and look for broken or cracked baffles in the burner or plenum. So if in the burner, from the fan to the plenum, you want to look for anything cracked or broken. And you might think it's something that's just cracked that's not going to affect anything in the plenum of the dryer. Anything, any airflow baffle cracked can affect the drying abilities of the dryer. So never look at a cracked part in the dryer and say that is not affecting my airflow. Especially if you're having issues, you need to fix what's broke before you can move on to figuring out what you can't see. So, is the burner not burning evenly? The burner not burning evenly can cause uneven heating, hot spots in the dryer. And if you have hot spots in the dryer, then you have uneven drying, and that hurts capacity. So the other thing that can be messing with your capacity is plugged grain column, uneven grain flow in the dryer. So this is an issue where you fill your dryer, there's normally more fines. So if you fill your dryer in the middle, there's normally more fines in the middle. If you fill your dryer at the end, there's more fines at that end. You may have to open the flow gates at the location where you fill your dryer to get the grain to flow evenly. So this is something that I would recommend having a qualified person look at, not just going and adjusting for the on a hip shot. You want to do testing and watching grain flow and stuff. So, and there again, that's flow gates adjusted by unqualified personnel. If the flow gates are not adjusted properly, you're not going to get the correct. If the flow gates are not adjusted properly, you're not going to get good grain flow or even grain flow. Thank you for watching.